Jesse Marsch heard it from the touchline, not from a replay, not from a slow-motion camera that would show the footage 17 times before the night was over. From the touchline, in real time, over the noise of 60,000 people inside BC Place, the coach heard the bone snap. That sound, the sound of Ismaël Koné's left leg breaking on the turf of a World Cup stadium, is what Canada's greatest football night will be remembered for. Not the 6 goals, not the first World Cup victory in the history of the Canadian men's national team, not the scenes of celebration spilling across Vancouver and into cities from Halifax to Victoria. The bone snap, the stretcher, the air cast, the 24-year-old raising his hand to a crowd that had risen to its feet, not in celebration, but in something older and harder than celebration. The wave of a man who understood, lying on that pitch in the 50th minute of the biggest match his country had ever played, that the dream he had carried his whole career was over. This is the story of June 18, 2026. The day Canada arrived at the World Cup, and the day the World Cup took something from them before they finished celebrating. To understand what this night meant, you need to understand who Ismaël Koné is. Born in Montreal, technically exceptional, physically imposing, the kind of midfielder who makes the game look simple in the way that only players with genuine quality can. He came through the youth system, moved to Europe, spent time with Watford, with Marseille, and arrived at Sassuolo in Serie A as one of the most watched young midfielders in Canadian football history. Major European clubs had been tracking him for months going into this tournament, not as a future prospect, as an immediate target. In Canada's first World Cup match against Bosnia-Herzegovina, Koné was their best player. Marsch said so himself, explicitly, after the game. Their best player, at a World Cup, on Canadian soil. But Koné was also a complicated figure. In a friendly against Romania just months before the tournament, Marsch substituted him off, with Canada leading 2-0. Koné's response was immediate and visible. He confronted Marsch on the touchline, walked away, came back for more, held back only by goalkeeper Dane St. Clair stepping physically between them. When he finally spoke days later, flanked by Marsch, who had already announced Koné would start the next match, he looked down at his chest, as though his jersey might help him find the words. "I care about this jersey and this team more than anything." Remember that line. Because of what happened on June 18th, it means something completely different now. The 51st minute, Canada leading 3-0, Qatar already down to 10 men, the match effectively decided. Koné at the center of everything. Turning, distributing. Then Asim Madibo arrived. The challenge came from behind. Late, reckless. The kind of tackle that produces a particular silence in a football stadium. The half-second silence that arrives before the crowd fully understands what it has just witnessed. Koné went down. Not the theatrical fall of a player making the most of contact. The immediate, uncontrolled collapse of a body that has been genuinely damaged. He grabbed his left leg. He put both hands on his head. The expressions on the faces of the players closest to him told you everything before any camera angle confirmed it. Captain Steven Eustachio was one of the first to reach him. "I saw his leg," Eustachio said afterwards. "I saw that something wasn't right." On the touchline, Jesse Marsch heard the bone snap. What followed was one of the most distressing scenes a World Cup has produced in years. The medical staff arrived within seconds. Players from both teams formed a protective ring around Koné while he was being treated, some of them visibly unable to look at what the cameras were showing the rest of the world. The stretcher was called almost immediately. An air cast was applied around the left leg bent at an angle that broadcasters were warning viewers about before replaying. The footage itself was brutal, not in the way that dangerous tackles sometimes look worse than they are, in the way that makes medical professionals watching on television immediately understand what they are seeing. The angle of the leg, the immediate nature of the collapse, the speed at which the medical team reached for the stretcher, rather than attempting any assessment on the pitch. All of it pointed in the same direction before any official confirmation arrived. Koné was conscious throughout. That detail matters, because what came next required him to be present for it. As the stretcher was carried across BC Place, 60,000 people rose to their feet, not for a goal, not for a victory, for a man on a stretcher, 24 years old, at the World Cup his country was hosting, looking up at a stand full of people who were giving him everything they had, because everything they had was the only thing that could reach him in that moment. Koné raised his hand. He waved. The crowd roared back louder than it had for any of the 3 goals Canada had already scored. And the television cameras, which had been showing the replay of the tackle on loop, cut back to Koné's face as the stretcher reached the tunnel. He was not crying. He was not hiding. He was looking at the crowd with the expression of someone absorbing something enormous and trying to hold it together long enough to give something back. He disappeared into the tunnel. The ambulance was waiting, and somewhere in the commentary boxes and broadcast studios around the world, people who cover football for a living stopped talking about the scoreline. After a VAR review, Asim Madibo received a straight red card. Dangerous play. The correct decision. Qatar were now down to 9 men. And that is where the second controversy began, because the Qatar bench did not accept the red card quietly. The reaction from Qatar's technical area was immediate and furious. Staff members, coaching personnel, players not involved in the match, all of them protesting a decision that had just been given after a tackle that broke a man's leg. The protests were loud enough and sustained enough to set the temperature for everything that followed. Canada continued to play. They scored again and again, 6-0 by the time the final whistle came. And then the whistle blew, and both benches erupted. Players, staff, coaching personnel from both teams moving toward each other on the touchline, not in celebration, in confrontation. The scenes that television cameras catch from a distance and that witnesses describe afterwards in careful language because everyone involved knows how it looks. There was pushing, there was shouting, there was the particular chaos that happens when tensions that have been building for 40 minutes suddenly have no more football left to contain them. And at the center of it, when the dust settled, was a handshake between two head coaches that every journalist in the stadium described in exactly the same terms. Not friendly. Jesse Marsch and Julian Lopetegui, face to face. After a match in which Marsch had stood on a touchline and heard a bone snap and watched his most important midfielder leave in an ambulance, while the game continued around the wound his absence had left in the lineup. Marsch was precise at the press conference. Deliberately so. He said Madibo had come to the dressing room and apologized to Koné personally, that Koné had told the team it happened, that he didn't believe the tackle was malicious in intent, and then he said the thing that has been quoted everywhere since. I don't understand the reaction from their entire bench to try to start a fight about it being a red card when a clear foul just happened that broke a player's leg. Strange behavior. 2 words, quiet, controlled, and more cutting than anything louder would have been. Because that image, Qatar's bench protesting a red card while the player who made the tackle was apologizing in the dressing room, is the image that has defined the post-match conversation as much as any of the 6 goals. The contrast between Madibo's private acknowledgement and his bench's public fury said everything about what the final whistle actually released. Because between the stretcher and the final whistle, something happened that no scriptwriter would dare put on paper. Nathan Saliba came on to replace Koné in the 57th minute. Nathan Saliba. The same Nathan Saliba who Koné had raged at Marsch for substituting him in favor of during that Romania friendly. The same Saliba who had stood there while Koné was physically held back from their own coach. Who had forgiven him quietly, the way teammates do. Who had said afterwards that Ismaël is a really good guy, he's not like this. 5 minutes after coming on, Saliba scored. Canada's 4th goal. And when Saliba celebrated, he reached down and lifted Koné's shirt. Not his own shirt, Koné's. The shirt of the player he had replaced. The shirt of the player who was at that exact moment in a Vancouver hospital while his team played the game he had been carried out of. There is no script for that moment. That is what football does when it is being itself. The reaction online was not slow. Within minutes of the shirt tribute, the clip was everywhere. Not the goal itself, the shirt. Saliba holding it up, the crowd responding. The combination of what it meant, between these 2 specific players, with this specific history, on this specific night. Arriving simultaneously for millions of people watching around the world. Clips of the tackle ran alongside clips of the tribute. The standing ovation played next to the bench confrontation. The footage of Koné waving from the stretcher became one of the most shared images from any sporting event of the opening week. Comments describing it as the most emotional moment of the tournament so far ran across every platform. Hashtags carrying Koné's name were trending in Canada, in France where his heritage connects him to a wider diaspora, in Italy where his club Sassuolo's fans were watching, and across the broader football world that had been introduced to him properly for the first time at this tournament. The phrase that kept appearing, across languages, across platforms, across fan communities, with no shared allegiance except to football, was the same phrase, first victim of World Cup 2026. Not the only victim, not a unique case in the history of the tournament, but the first, the one that defined the week's tone, the one that sat alongside the empty seats and the refused referee and the VAR controversy and the jersey bans. and added a human face to a tournament that was already accumulating more uncomfortable questions than any World Cup in recent memory. Because Koné's injury did not happen in a vacuum. It happened inside a specific tournament, in a specific week, to a specific player, in a specific context. And that context is what has made the conversation around it travel further and land harder than a broken leg at a football match would typically travel and land. He was at his home World Cup. He was 24. He was being watched by clubs who were preparing transfer bids based on what they saw him do at this tournament. This was not a farewell for a veteran. This was a beginning, a global introduction. The match against Bosnia had been his advertisement. The match against Qatar was supposed to be his continuation. And it ended in the 51st minute, when the match was already won, when there was nothing left to play for except the scoreline. In a challenge that the man who made it apologized for in a dressing room afterwards. The pointlessness of the timing is what sits in the gut of everyone who has watched the footage back. Jesse Marsch held both truths together at the press conference. The joy and the grief. Both real, both demanding to be spoken. Ismaël is such a great kid, he said. He's imperfect, but that is why we love him. He can do things that no other player can do. He embodies a lot of what this team is. He was our best player against Bosnia. He is a huge loss for us. He stopped. Our hearts are with him, but that kid has a huge future. A huge future is real. Broken legs heal. The clubs watching him before the injury are still watching. His ability does not disappear because of what happened at the 51st minute. But the future is not June 18, 2026. The future is not BC Place. The future is not this Canadian run that after a 6-0 victory suddenly feels like something this team is capable of dreaming about all the way to the knockout stages. The future is somewhere else. And right now, somewhere else is not enough. The 2026 World Cup has produced in its opening week a list of things it will be required to account for when the history of this tournament is written. Empty seats in Guadalajara. A referee turned away at the border. A VAR scandal in Los Angeles. Jerseys stripped of their history in Seattle and Boston. And now, a broken leg at a home World Cup. None of those incidents share the same cause, but they are all expressions of a tournament that arrived with enormous promises and has spent its first week testing every one of them against reality. Canada will play on. They will carry him the way teams carry their wounded. Saliba's shirt celebration is already the image this tournament will remember from this night. Not the 6 goals. Not the historic scoreline. A player lifting the shirt of the man who is no longer there. The man who said he cared about the jersey and the team more than anything is watching the rest of the tournament from a hospital in Vancouver. And the substitute who replaced him, the same substitute he once raged at a coach for bringing on, lifted that jersey to 60,000 people in his honor. Football does not do clean endings. It offers joy and heartbreak at the same time, on the same pitch, in the same 90 minutes, and asks you to hold them both without dropping either one. On June 18, 2026, at BC Place in Vancouver, Canada held them both. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room with his family around him, Ismaël Koné held them too. What do you think? When a tournament's biggest night and its most heartbreaking moment arrive in the same 90 minutes, which one do you remember? And does Ismaël Koné deserve to be called the first victim of the 2026 World Cup? Or is that a title that belongs to someone else entirely? Leave it in the comments. These are the conversations this channel exists for.